Is the UK turning against Brexit? Or is the departure from the European Union delivering what was promised? With the country heading into a recession, Britons are starting to examine the real consequences of leaving the EU. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is questioning the benefit of Brexit. A 2016 referendum in Britain irrevocably changed the future of the country. 72% of the electorate turned out to vote, and 52% of them chose to leave the EU. It set into motion years of negotiations and changes to laws and legislation. The man championing the cause was Nigel Farage.
We will be leaving this prison of nations at the end of January. And we won't become a third country, as I've been hearing this morning. No, we're going to become an independent, self-governing nation.
6 years on, 5 prime ministers later, and with the country now facing an economic recession expected to last until 2024, was Brexit really the best thing for the UK? Some politicians blame the economic downturn on the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine. They cite the International Monetary Fund's prediction that around a third of the world's economy will go into recession this year or next. But small UK business owners argue they've been struggling specifically because of Brexit.
Having to load a day earlier than normal, paperwork, the mountains of paperwork that we've got to carry in a lorry, from customs declarations to health certificates, it's just not possible. The costs involved are astronomical.
We usually get our stuff picked up in the afternoon, and from then on it goes, starts a journey down through the country to the borders, on the ferries, then shipped to France. And obviously with the Brexit and the different rules and regulations, that the guys are starting to struggle.
There's no protection for us. Brexit has had the other consequence of making our labour more expensive. We have to get labour now from places like Turkmenistan and Kyrgyzstan.
And large businesses are feeling the effect as well. High street clothing retailer Next boss, Lord Wolfson, said recently, quote, "It's not the Brexit I wanted." He was a prominent advocate of leaving the EU, but now says the UK's current immigration policy is crippling economic growth. Since new Brexit rules took effect at the start of 2021, EU nationals no longer have the freedom to live and work in the UK. Instead, a new points-based immigration system has been implemented to attract skilled workers. In October, a report stated that 3/4 of UK companies have been hit by labor shortages in the last 12 months. As Lord Wolfson says, "We have got people queuing up to come to this country to pick crops that are rotting in fields, to work in warehouses that otherwise wouldn't be operable, and we're not letting them in." While other Britons are calling Lord Wolfson out for backtracking on the benefits of creating Fortress UK and restricting immigration.
When Lord Wolfson encouraged people to vote for Brexit, that everybody knew, including him, that it would actually cause the problem that he's now complaining about and describing as a crippling effect, having a crippling effect on economic growth. Everybody voted to cripple economic growth. It's very patronising and condescending to suggest otherwise. Sarcasm emoji.
So just how much Brexit is to blame for current economic woes is up for debate. But as they say, numbers don't lie. After the pandemic, trade in almost all G7 nations has seen a recovery. The one exception is the UK, where trade has remained more or less flat. And predictions for next year's GDP growth show a similar story.
According to the OECD projection, the British economy is not likely to grow in 2023. It's estimated to perform worse than advanced economies like China, Canada, and Japan. Even developing nations are ahead of the UK. For example, the Indonesian economy is expected to grow by 4.8%, while South Korea, a highly developed nation, will see around 2.2% growth. And one country below Britain is Russia, which is currently under heavy economic sanctions.
So while EU and G7 economies bounce back, it looks like the UK might be left behind. So is Brexit to blame? Joining me now from Birmingham, is co-founder of the pro-EU advocacy group Our Future, Our Choice, Femi Oluwole. From London, Ben Habib is a former Brexit Party member and chairman of Brexit Watch. And also from the British capital, David Henig. He is the UK director of the European Centre for International Political Economy. Thanks all so much for being with us. Ben, I'll start with you. Let's accentuate the positive, if we can. Who's happy with Brexit? What's been gained?
Well, the first point to make is that we haven't got Brexit yet. We have Northern Ireland left behind in the European Union, and the Brexit deal that Prime Minister Johnson signed binds us into non-regression on key policy issues. So we can't actually deviate from EU laws in key policy areas that would enable us to take advantage of Brexit. And when you couple that with Northern Ireland effectively having been ditched in the process, we haven't got Brexit. We've left the institutions of the EU, but we can't actually avail ourselves of the opportunity to deregulate.
Okay, let me check with Femi. Is that fair? Is that why Brexit hasn't worked?
What he's doing is basically
Sorry,
admitting that Brexit was a
you just said Brexit hasn't worked.
Oh, that you haven't got Brexit. I mean, I'm sorry if it's an issue of semantics. Yeah. You haven't got Brexit.
Well,
so far, Brexit, what's been in it?
That's not semantics.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, we were told by UK leaders that Brexit has been delivered. So, okay, Femi, what's gone wrong?
This precise thing we're doing right now, that it just shows how much of a con Brexit always was. Because the reason Ben says that we haven't got Brexit is because Northern Ireland is still in the single market. Is Norway in the EU? Norway is not in the EU, yet it's in the single market, even more in the single market than Northern Ireland is. So this idea of we haven't got Brexit just means that when he sold people Brexit in 2016, it was on a list of things that were never actually going to end up coming true. And that's why what's happening now is happening now. And even he said that this is actually worse than staying in the EU. In fact, he tried to go to the Supreme Court to make that point. The fact is that the people who actually are in charge of the economy, people who promised Brexit, delivered Brexit, they're experts in government. The government's official experts say that Brexit has been more damaging to our economy long term than COVID, costing a 4% drop in GDP relative to where we would have been had we not left the EU. So this is making people poorer. And as we know, there are loads of global challenges, and Brexit is making things even worse at our most vulnerable moment.
Okay, let me get David's take. Go ahead.
Well, Brexit has been done because we left the EU. We have the Brexit we have. There has been an economic impact. There's no doubt that there's been an economic impact. On the other hand, the UK economy hasn't fallen off a cliff as some would suggest. But I think what we already hear from this conversation is one of the issues is that we can't move on because we're still arguing about what Brexit means. There's an economy to be run. There's UK politics to be run. It's awfully hard to do that when we're still discussing whether we should have left the EU or not in 2016, and when it looks like that's going to dominate the discourse. Yes, there's been a little bit of an economic hit. Could be quite a big economic hit. It'll be even bigger if we don't actually stop talking about it and work out where we are now as an economy and where we need to go to.
Okay, well
But that's precisely the point. That's precisely the point. It is the politics that's getting in the way of it, and it's the politics that led us to Brexit in the first place. Because as you say, there are major challenges that we have to deal with. There is a cost of living crisis. People are struggling to pay their bills. This winter is going to be very bad. The news came out today that the UK economy shrank by 0.2%, which means we might be heading towards a recession. All this stuff needs to be dealt with. But in order to deal with those things, we need to deal with the problems linked to Brexit. So, for example, the fact that we don't have alignment on EU rules, the fact that fishermen are struggling to sell their products. They say they're losing £300 million over 5 years. Small businesses are struggling to sell. All those issues need concrete solutions, and most of them involve alignment with the EU single market. But if you have people such as Ben, or people such as the Brexiteers who constantly say, no, but if you do that, you'll be betraying the will of the people from 6 years ago, as if we somehow need to be bound by the wishes of 70 million people the previous decade, and that's more important than what people want now, given that majority of the polls, well, pretty much all the polls consistently show that the majority of people do not like Brexit and want to reverse it in some way.
Okay, I guess the question is, I mean, has it been done wrong, or was it never going to work in the first place? But nevertheless, we are where we are. Ben, let me come back to you. If we look specifically then at trade, we now have the cost of manning borders, the dwindling efficiency in trade because of those borders and customs, leaving the UK to, companies rather, leaving the UK to avoid those barriers to trade. So what's actually compensating for that?
Well, we haven't actually imposed any border checks on the UK side for goods coming into the United Kingdom, either across the IRC or indeed from the continent. We've got a completely open approach, which at some point we will have to change because it's been a transitionary period that they've extended and extended. But the point is that Femi talked about our GDP growth being 4% worse as a result of Brexit. I mean, he can't seriously be suggesting that at the moment we would have GDP growth of around 4%, which would exceed dramatically all major economies' growth rates at the moment. The world is in the financial and economic mess that it's in because of lockdowns, because of the breaking of supply chains, because of politicians across the globe not being prepared for unlocking and the impact that would have on demand for fuel, which absolutely skyrocketed. And we are, contrary to what Femi says, we are still aligned with EU rules. And one of those rules, which we can't deviate from, is a commitment to net zero. And on the back of that commitment to net zero, we've turned our back on North Sea gas, North Sea oil. We're refusing to frack. And so we're refusing to become an independent country from an energy perspective. If you look at the US, it's had a much better economy than we have because it has become energy independent. And the fundamental problems with the UK have got nothing to do with Brexit. They've got everything to do with poor governance for the last 12 years and a refusal of the government to actually take advantage of the Brexit freedoms available to it. Rishi Sunak has put that firmly on the back burner. He had said that we would ditch the 8,000 odd regulations and laws on our statute books within the first 100 days of his premiership. But he's completely put that on the back burner now. So you can't argue that we've had any opportunity for the benefits of Brexit until our politicians actually give effect to it. And it's got nothing to do with some ideological commitment to a vote 6 years ago. It's got everything to do with making policies and setting a trajectory for the United Kingdom that suits British people and not the bureaucrats in Brussels.
But it almost sounds like you're complaining about the bureaucrats and politicians in the UK instead not being able to do this properly. Right. So it's either bureaucrats are everywhere, you've just kind of traded one for the other at a cost. But let me ask David.
Well, I would trade European bureaucrats for British ones every day of the week.
But it's a lot more expensive to have done that. It's cost a lot of money at a real tough time for the...
That's the point of democracy. The point of being able to elect your leaders. If I don't like the European commissioners, I can't sack them. The British people can't sack them. We can sack this useless government that we've got at the moment.
Okay, let me ask David. David, quickly, I mean, at the very least, though, has Brexit left the UK more vulnerable, to the global shocks that were just cited there, with no union and no trade market to kind of fall back on after the pandemic, global inflation, the energy crisis, now the war in Ukraine? At the very least, is the UK now just a more vulnerable country?
Exactly that. Look, I want to make a correction to one thing Ben said. There's a lot of things there. And one of that thing is, it's not that the UK loses 4% in GDP year on year. Cumulatively, there are losses built up from the fact we've put trade barriers up. Ben says that we haven't put trade barriers up to goods coming in. We have put trade barriers up to people coming in, to services. We see, for example, that the UK has a labour shortage greater than we see in other countries. One of the reasons for that is we have a smaller labour market now. Immigration is clearly a big issue. We haven't solved that issue. We're more vulnerable in terms of inflation, not just from labour costs, but also in terms of some of the food issues. In terms of the regulation, yeah, well, that's a choice every country has to make. You can't just get rid of all your regulations, like Ben seems to think you can just get rid of, everything that the EU does. The US has lots of regulations. Australia has lots of regulations. Actually, many of them are pretty similar to each other. So what we're doing is we're going through this. We're running around in circles. We're more vulnerable as well because we're having this argument: should you have regulations? It's a silly argument. Every country, every developed country has a similar set of. The US has a similar set of regulations.
US
It's worse. If you talk to people doing business, doing business in the US, they find it harder because of state level regulations. I also do business, so we both do business.
The US and the EU failed to reach an agreement, a trade agreement, because of differences over regulations. Regulations play a key part.
I know. I was there. I was negotiating it.
Well, I defer then to your brilliant contribution to the debate, David. But then you will know that they failed to agree because they had a dispute over regulatory issues. And regulations are critical to economic advancement. Every regulation you put in place has a cost associated with it for business. Every regulation you take away changes the way businesses behave. So the key is making sure we have the right regulations to guide British national interest in the correct direction. That's
okay.
it.
Okay, I want to get Femi back into this. Femi, if you had a quick comment, do go ahead, because I have a specific question to ask you as well. Go ahead.
No, ask me. Go ahead.
Okay, I got to say right now in the UK, is saying anything against Brexit actually seems like it's a liability. You're mocked for it. So you might be one of those people that gets mocked. You know, they're called bemoaners, for example. So, I mean, will there be a time, do you think, putting forth the arguments that you've put forward so far, that the bemoaners will be vindicated and all of this, as you've observed from your opinion, will be recognized?
So actually, we've pretty much passed that point a fair while ago. The issue is that sadly the UK media doesn't really recognize how far we've come. The fact that everybody can see that Brexit is a massive failure. All the polls show that most people don't like Brexit, can see that it's damaging things, can see that it's making poor, and that's where we are. The issue is, I saw a news broadcast the other day where they talked about what can be done to solve the economic crisis, to deal with the economic crisis, and said that, well, because Liz Truss's plan of giving massive tax cuts to millionaires didn't work, I guess we're stuck with low growth, even though the official government figures show that you can change things significantly. And I think because the polls show that and because especially young people especially voted heavily to remain. In fact, the maths that was done, I think, in 2018 that said that by 2021 we'd be a Remain voting population purely by the process of time, because old people moving off the register, young people moving onto it. We are a Remain country and have been for a fair while now.
But I mean, then the question is, could the UK rejoin the EU? And if so, why has Keir Starmer, for example, head of the Labour Party, why has he ruled this out?
The Labour Party has always been timid on Brexit. The leadership has never been on the right page. We had that with Jeremy Corbyn. We now have it with Keir Starmer, because they're basically so very scared that, if we make the issue about Brexit, given that last time the Tories seemed to have won the election on Brexit, even though the majority voted for second referendum party, so we already had a majority against Brexit back in 2019. But the Keir Starmer is basically a coward on this issue. But the people of the UK definitely on the right page. The issue, as for the path to rejoining the EU, the path to rejoining the EU is actually quite straightforward. We have a majority. Our voting system doesn't allow the majority will of the people to actually be expressed. Because, as I said, the majority voted for second referendum parties. The majority voted for parties to the left of the Conservatives in almost every single election since the Second World War. But because of our voting system, the Tories consistently get into power because their votes essentially count more. And so if we do get a proportional voting system, which there's lots of movement towards that now, then at the next election, we can start to move towards alignment with the EU single market, potentially towards the EU, maybe in a couple of elections' time. So the path to it is basically restoring democracy in the UK.
Okay, Ben, what's made you laugh there? Go ahead.
Well, we've had 4 plebiscites. We had the referendum. We had the European Union elections. We had the Theresa May election in 2017, and then the Boris Johnson election in 2019. All of them were fought on a ticket to get Brexit done, and all of them resulted in a vote for Brexit. Every single one of them.
Here's where Ben's wrong.
I mean, what the democracy that Femi wants is a democracy that gives him the result he. Can I finish, Femi?
Let's go through those.
It's a democracy that gives him the result that he wants. He's going to add up all the minority parties now and say, if I take all the minority parties together, they actually exceed the majority view.
Okay.
But it doesn't work that way, Femi. That's not how democracy in this country works. Our constitutional
yes, I know, that's kind of the problem.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what, Ben. Please, it's really difficult to hear.
I haven't finished. He's interrupting me. If you don't like democracy in this country, leave. Go to a democratic system that you like.
Yeah, so Ben, in 2017, the majority voted for parties committed to staying in the single market. In 2019, the majority voted for parties committed to a second referendum. In the European election, the majority voted for parties committed to a second referendum or staying in the single market.
Okay.
And so for the last 3 elections, the majority has been opposed to this Brexit. You oppose this Brexit. The Brexit Party opposes this Brexit. The DUP opposes this Brexit. All the parties that support Brexit oppose this Brexit. This hasn't been democratic for a very long time.
I'll tell you what. I want to go back to David because I want to talk specifically about. We talked about Lord Wolfson. We heard some of the things he had to say. And when you hear someone like him, David, talk about now the need for immigration to fill these massive staff shortages for low-skilled workers. When the whole immigration change was supposed to be only about bringing the high-skilled, the most sought-after immigrants into the UK. And now he's saying, wow, we need people to work the cash register, to work in our warehouses. What do you say to that? I mean, how could that not have been seen beforehand as a serious problem?
Well, look, we could see that some of those issues. You could see in 2016 that there was a debate on immigration, as in many political debates. Not everything that was said was entirely accurate. It was said that we could do without free movement from the EU. Doubtless we can, but at a cost, and that was going to mean that some parts of the labour market were going to suffer. Obviously, we didn't know about COVID then, which had doubled the effect. But this is the point. We are now trying to make up for. Really, now we're on to 6 years of pretty misleading debate. Oh, we can just stop immigration coming in, or we can just get rid of 5,000 regulations, or we can just do that. It's actually, or we can just easily rejoin the EU. That's not easy either. We're in a situation, we've got an immigration policy challenge. We've got huge labour shortages, for example, in agriculture, in social care. What are we going to do about that? Not easy to get those people in, and at the low wages, they potentially want to stay here if they come here to work. What do we do about that? Similarly, when all the regulations, what do we do about all the regulations to create the a competitive UK? It isn't by just getting rid of 5,000 of them. You've really got some complex decisions now, and then in the background you've got the sort of debate going back to 2016, which is quite a distraction. So we're trying to do really complex things, and then we're still trying to have this debate from 2016. It's not really working. And on immigration specifically, that's a real issue because it's always controversial. It's been controversial for 100 years when my ancestors came to this country.
2 minutes left. Quickly, Femi, go ahead because I want last words from Ben as well. Go ahead.
But yeah, that's precisely the point. We talked about who's dragging the conversation back to 2016. If we forget 2016 for a second and just look rationally, logically, objectively at what is best for the people of the UK right now where we are, then the things that we need to do in terms of alignment with the EU, in terms of fixing the labour shortage and bringing people in and getting rid of the barriers at the border, all those things are simple to do. Yes, we're joining the EU, not a simple concept. But the act of simply alignment with EU rules and negotiating some sort of single market deal, which the EU offered many times over the last few years, that's quite a straightforward process, and that can be done. The only thing in the way of it is the ideology of people like Ben who want to take us back to 2016 and act like somehow people who in 2016 knew exactly what they'd be getting now are on board with it, even though he himself is not.
Okay, Ben, I just want to clarify something with you before we go. Many complain that leaving the EU has just added or equaled the bureaucracy of the EU at huge expense, just to really duplicate what they were already working with in the EU, to say now, okay, the same thing we have, but it's our sovereign entity. It's almost like kind of cutting your nose to spite your face just to say, it's my choice. Do you accept that?
No, I don't accept that for a second. Just because our politicians haven't had the wherewithal to actually craft a path for the UK that suits the UK doesn't mean that Brexit is wrong or that sovereignty, exercising your sovereign rights, is wrong. Absolutely not. What we need is a government that actually has a vision, has the ability to make a plan, and then can execute it.
I think that's what every country in the world would like to have, but got to be realistic about what to expect from our politicians.
Well, I mean, if you're saying that globally all political institutions have failed.
It's not that they failed. We just have to manage expectations, and this was a big, big undertaking to put a.
Look, the United Kingdom is one of the greatest countries in the world. We have one of the greatest heritages.
Okay.
We are one of the the deepest, broadest democracy in the world. We will make a success of it, and people like Femi.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so, for everyone's sake. That's going to have to be the final word, though, because unfortunately we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. Really, I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We will see you next time.